Guys, it's Mac here. Today we're going to build a real-life application using React, NodeJS, and a bunch of technology services in AWS, API Gateway, S3, DynamoDB, and Lambda functions. This is a fully serverless application, so you're not maintaining any server whatsoever. So this is going to be fully, running on AWS infrastructure. We'll be serving our front-end application, which is a React application directly from S3. We'll be building a Lambda function that works with Node.js in order to communicate with DynamoDB, and then of course building the RESTful API and deploying it to production environment using API Gateway. This is a real life example. It's going to be an invoice approval process. I want to make sure you guys understand end-to-end building such an application without using any server, using modern technologies like Node.js and React. Without further ado, let's get started. All right, guys, this is the application that we're going to build. This is a React application, front-end application, and we are serving this application directly from Amazon S3. Amazon S3 is a simple storage service in Amazon cloud infrastructure with 11 nines durability. It's highly available. It can scale, without any issue. There's no bottleneck. You don't have to maintain any server, and you can easily serve your JavaScript website or any client application from Amazon S3 directly, which I'm going to show you how to set that up. So our application is basically a invoice processing or maybe invoice approval system, web-based application. And I understand we can add many authentication and a lot of different things, which I'm gonna let you guys work on it. I'm gonna focus on end-to-end application, building this front end, going to the back end, calling the API, Node.js, connecting to DynamoDB, and set things up actually so you guys understand how we build a entire application using serverless technology. So this application, the way it works, we are expecting to see if the manager says this is okay, or this invoice is not okay, and this invoice is okay. So we're all caught up. This is great, and the way I configured this, if you refresh this, there's like some data. It loads the data into the application so we can test it. So this is our basically front end that we are serving from Amazon S3 US West region, right? It's S3 is a very, very reliable place to serve your static websites. So these are all API calls that goes to the server. So Node.js returns all these items from DynamoDB, and we are reading those items in our React application. Okay, so before actually we start coding this application, I want to show you the main diagram as basically architecture of the entire solution. So these are all the user on the left side. As you can see, they are sending requests to our S3 bucket, which is serving our basically GUI. So this is a serverless front-end application architecture. There is no server, there is no patch management, there's no server being down, restarting, rebooting. No hassle whatsoever. You're directly serving information from S3 bucket to the entire world. We can actually accelerate this delivery by leveraging a service called CloudFront. I'm not going to get into that in that video. Maybe later on I record another video, which basically is CDN network. It's a content delivery network based on your region and your location. If you're if you live in Australia, so it's probably better to serve your content from somewhere closer to where you live instead of, for example, serving your traffic from US to reduce the latency. But in this scenario, we're going to just assume all the users, they're going to connect to this S3 bucket. They're going to get this web page that, as you can see, it's a React application. This is our final application. And it will be basically, they'll be able to interact with our application. Our application is using a service called API Gateway, which we're going to use in this application in order to provide HTTP methods like get and post and delete and things like that. We can develop all those. I'm going to show you how exactly we connect our React application to API Gateway. right? We're going to make asynchronous call. Asynchronous calls are good because we don't have to wait for the response, and we can just send the request, and then when the result is ready, we'll be notified. So it's basically event-driven programming. And API gateway, in order to fetch data from our database, which is a NoSQL millisecond, really fast NoSQL database. It's going to get the information, and we're going to basically pass it to the application through this Lambda function, which is going to run a piece of NodeJS code, right? So basically, we'll be using a NodeJS on our server side, as you can see. So our Lambda service underneath, we're going to program it using Node.js, and we're going to contact DynamoDB, which is NoSQL application, highly available, very fast database, NoSQL. So we're not going to just use join. These are like very simple rows. We're going to return them and store them in DynamoDB instead of SQL database, right? And API gateway will be basically handling everything for us. We don't have to, again, maintain any server, anything. Scalability is not an issue. API gateway and Amazon will be handling all these issues for us, so we can focus only our application instead of managing infrastructure. So this is the entire picture and entire flow. So we're going to go ahead by installing a few things on your machine, and then we can start coding this application. But before we actually do that, we're going to install a few things on your computer. If you've never developed React application, the first thing you need to download is Node.js. Download Node.js for your operating system and install it on your machine. Node.js comes with a package manager called npm. Using npm, we can install any library, JavaScript library on our machine, right? For React, our application, we'll be using React Strap, Bootstrap, Font Awesome, and a lot of awesome libraries. So in order to install React on your machine after downloading Node.js, you can use this command in your terminal, npm install-g create-react-app, in order to install React. Then you can create your application and go to the directory and start the application. Your application will be served on port 3000 by default. Then we can add Bootstrap and React Strap and React DOM, and we can use all these components that you guys are going to see in order to make a nice GUI for our users. We'll be using Font Awesome, and you can go ahead to their GitHub page for React Font Awesome, and underneath you will see the installation command. We're going to go ahead and use all these commands throughout this tutorial. So I'll be using Visual Studio Code. For your Visual Studio Code, once you download it and open it, we can go ahead and install two main extensions. I'll be using Prettier in order to serve a nicer code, and also I'll be using Simple React Snippet because I don't want to keep writing all these default codes in my React application. Once you install these three applications by just simply clicking on them and using the install button on the page, then we'll be ready to start the application. So I have a new folder. I just need to open my terminal, and as you can see, I can toggle to terminal, and if I do ls, my folder is basically a list in my folder, or basically directory is empty. Now we can go ahead and start creating our React application. So let's do that. Okay, my application is ready. As you can see on the left side, I have an app folder. Inside this app folder, I do have a public folder, which will serve the public HTML page, and I do have a SRC folder, which contains all the JavaScript libraries that works behind the scene in order to serve this application to my public users. So there's some instruction underneath. When it's done, it says just go ahead and navigate to the folder, and when you're in the folder, you can simply go ahead and use npm start to run your application. My application will be running on port 3000 by default. As I mentioned, we're going to install a bunch of libraries for our React application. One of them is React Strap, which is the stateless React components for Bootstrap for in our React application. And the way we do that, we're just going to go ahead and copy npm install -save. We're going to install is npm install bootstrap. And we're going to use --save. So we're going to have it in our package.json. And as you can see right here, these are the dependency file that the React application keeps track of. The second one we're going to install is React Strap, React, and React DOM. We're going to install that as well. Once we did that, the next thing we're going to install, we're going to go ahead and install Font Awesome. And here's Font Awesome, the solid SVG icons. And the last one is React Font Awesome. So in any single React application, we have two folders: public, which is going to serve our main file to our users called index.html. There is a division inside this file, which is called root. And the mission here that the React application will be basically generating the web page for us, and it will replace the content with this root division in our index.html folder. So if I go back here to SRC, I'm going to go ahead and remove the file called app.js because once you create, that's the default basically component, and we don't want to look at that. I want to walk you through all the steps from scratch. So we do have a file called index.js, which is the entry point of our private side of our application. Our SRC folder is basically our source code, the React source code. As you can see, there are a bunch of imports. Don't worry about them. I'm going to tell you exactly what they do. But the one thing that I want you to pay attention to is the import side. This is how we import components. We build reusable small components that they do one thing and they can be reused in our application. If you have an application header, if you have a checkout, if you have a form in your application, you can import it as many times as you want in different pages by just simply importing this component. This tells React, go ahead and look for a file that's called app.js and import it to this index.js and name it app. Then the way we're going to replace this component with the root element, we're just going to use pure JavaScript document.get element by ID of root, and then we're going to put the app instead of this root. And React, as you can see, it's going to render this application for us. So basically we build component and this is how we use them. If you see, this is the app component, and I can basically go ahead and reuse this component everywhere in my application. So since we don't have that app.js file, I'm going to go ahead and create app.js. So if you recall, I installed simple React snippet, and that's what it does. It's going to help me basically create all the import and a boilerplate code without wasting too much time typing code that basically doesn't add any value. So I'm going to go ahead, imrc, I'm going to install, I'm going to insert this command which imports a React that I can basically use to develop React, and also component. You will see component is basically, we build components. Everything in React evolves around component. By importing component, basically we'll inherit all the methods and all the abilities of any React component into our application. So the next thing is we're going to type cc and hit enter. This is basically going to create us a structure for our React application, and I'm going to name this app. And as you can see at the end, when this class JavaScript class finishes the work, which extends component, it means it's going to inherit all the features and behavior from component. And then at the end, when it's done, it's going to export this function, export this class as a piece of component so we can use in our index.js file. So think about every single React component as a box that has a class inside that does something, but at the end there's a arrow out, there's an output that gets exported to somewhere that we want to use. So in this case, in app.js, it's basically is being used in our index.js file. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to go ahead and write a simple division here, and I'm going to tell you why in a second, and just to test something quick. So we're going to start the application by just going to this folder, and we're going to run npm start, and we're going to wait for the application to run. So in React, we use something called JSX, XML JavaScript. We ran the application, and then here it is. We have a test, the content of the page using JSX, and then something called Babel under the hood will basically translate these JSX files for the web browser in order to basically show them in our web page. But it is very easy. It's very similar to HTML codes, and you will understand as I proceed writing and building this project. Start thinking about our application. Our application has a data model that basically it consists of a bunch of invoices, right? If you recall, we had something called ID that was basically it was 100, let's say, and then I'm going to just build this JSON object, and we're going to work with this soon. So we have a vendor. The vendor, it's going to be Hancock. Since we're building this application, this is just some temporary dumb data that we're going to use in our application. Amount is going to be $1,800, and the last one is date, which is invoice date. It's going to be, let's say, 8/21 in 2019. So the structure of every single row, it's something similar to this, right? And as you can see, it's a JSON object, so I can have as many items as I want in my application, right? Later on, we'll be connecting these. We'll be basically pulling this information from database and API gateway using Amazon Web Services, AWS. But for now, I just need some data to work with and build my React application. So I'm going to go ahead and put this constant in a variable called body, of course not in my return section. So every single React component, it has a state in it. So basically, a state is a internal memory. That's state I'm going to put is loading equal to false, and I'm going to put a bunch of invoices as an array inside my state. So, and as you can see, I have an array here which is empty. I'm going to pull the data and basically put them in my invoice variable. So state, we're not allowed to update the state directly. We definitely have to use set state. Don't forget that. This is very important because you're going to end up seeing a lot of unwanted behavior in your application. So what we're going to build at this time, we're going to go ahead in our render function. We're going to have a few things, right? So the first thing we're going to build is basically we're going to have another constant variable. It's going to be is loading. It's going to be this dot state. We're going to access the state, and we're going to get the is loading variable into this variable. And the second one is going to be const invoices. I could do everything in one line, but this way might just look a little bit easier. State dot invoices, so you guys can follow along. And I have a body variable right here. So let's move forward. In this section, I'm going to say if is loading is equal true, it means I'm still loading the content of the page. So I can go ahead and create a division that says loading. Very simple, right? The second part, if that's not the case, if the page is ready to return the result, right, we're going to go ahead and return a division basically that contains a table that shows all the content of the invoices plus few commands for the action center. If you recall, in our application, we had the data grid. So the way we're going to build that in here, we're going to go ahead, first of all, by start creating a division. So in JSX, if we want to assign a class to a tag, this is how we use it. In normal HTML, usually you just use a class in Bootstrap, but in JSX, this is how you do it. You do class name. So I'm going to actually use container, and the problem is container, I have not identified the container in my application, right? So the way we do that, we go up, and if you look at our index.js, I need to basically import the Bootstrap that I actually installed in my application. Okay, we're gonna go bootstrap slash css slash bootstrap.css. So we're just importing our CSS app file so we can actually use all these commands in our application. So the first thing I need to do basically to create a container that has a border. So container that has a border, right? And it's going to have border dash secondary, and then it's going to be rounded, right? These are all famous Bootstrap commands, right? And I'm going to centralize. So what's going to happen here, inside this guy, I'm going to have a division and basically handle all the rows in my application. So this is going to have a row, and inside this row, I'm going to have another division that this division is going to have class name equal col-12. It's going to basically cover the entire page, because Bootstrap divides the page by 12 columns. So inside this guy, I'm just going to have a h4 header. I'm going to say pending invoices, and this is going to be basically dash the test company, right? And I'm just going to go ahead and save this. So let's run the application. If we run the application, we're going to see we have a division that says perfect pending invoices. That's what I wanted to see. After that, I'm going to create another row, right? So because I keep things separate and neat, I'm just building this on the fly, so I might just change things. So hopefully you guys can follow along. Any question and comments, leave in the comment section. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. So the second division that I'm going to have here, again, it's going to have a class name. You guys just learned this, and this is going to be dash column dash. I'm going to use XSmall gridding system, and I'm going to center this guy, and I'm going to say text that's center, again from Bootstrap famous text. So I'm going to create a table, and if you guys recall, I installed something called React Strap, right? And React Strap is basically provides all these nice and neat features for my application. So what I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to go ahead and use table, import table, and import to my application from React Strap. And I don't see React Strap here, so I'm just going to go ahead and pause the application and reinstall React Strap. We're going to wait for React Strap to install, and once it's done, cd app, perfect, and then we're going to again go ahead and npm start. And now if I go back, I should have React Strap. Sorry, I'm just modifying the wrong section. So it's going to be React Strap. and table and bottom. We can of course import more features if you want to. And bootstrap table, we're going to add a dark theme to it. It's going to be responsive. Table is going to be stripped, and I'm going to use border. And when you hover over it, it's going to basically change the color. So I'm going to create t head for headers, and the headers is going to have of course some t head, and I'm going to have vendor and a few more things right here, down here. So let's say we have amount. If you look at our data structure in the JSON response that we received from a server, don't worry, I'll be adding this section to the actual server side, so we will be receiving the JSON response from our server. But for now, this is our data model. I'm just constructing this application. So I have ID, vendor, amount, and date, right? So if you go down, I'm going to have vendor, amount, invoice number, right? And I'm going to add actual invoice number here. See, I don't want to lose anything here, but let's just keep our data, more consistent. So this is going to be again invoices. So I have the invoice number as well in my application, and the last one, of course, it's a date. I will be in our application. If you recall, I had 4 actions. So let's add actions right here, and then our action, I'm going to add co-span of 4, so we can actually fit 4 commands underneath. And at the end, maybe one day I decide to just add the image of the invoice here. So I'm just going to add image for now. So let's go back to our application. Perfect. So we have a table that basically it's a very simple data grid. And we will be fetching the data, and we'll be inserting the information to basically t-body, because this was just the header, right? So we have the header, but for the body section, what will happen, we're going to have to build something for our body, right? And the way we do that, we just go ahead, we go t-body, table body, right? And in table body, I'm going to introduce something new here, which is going to be very simple. So I'm going to say if this dot state dot invoices dot length, if there's nothing inside the invoice, it means everything is done. I should not be basically showing any record, but I want to be a little bit more, verbose, give user a little bit like more information. So I'm just going to go ahead and say co-span. I have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I'm going to cover all the 9 columns with just one column, right? And I'm just going to tell them, so all caught up. And then if there is nothing there, it means I don't have any invoice to show to the user. And the reason I use 3 equals is basically I'm preventing any casting. I'm comparing value and a type. Remember, this is how we check the equality in JavaScript. I want to create a variable called invoices. I have to now go ahead, create a variable called invoices, right? And I use let. It's better than var because that prevents unwanted updates. It's very better. It's best to use let instead of var. And I'm gonna go ahead, and since I loaded all the invoices, so this is a constant. Actually, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna move this inside our variable called invoice inside our state. So if you look at the state is, again, it's internal to a component. We are now allowed to update the state directly, and nobody has access from outside to the internal state of a component. So state is basically a private container for our components, so where we can actually put the variables and information we want to process and attach to our application, right? So for now, I went ahead and just moved all those invoices to this invoice. Later on, as I said, we'll be pulling this from API Gateway. And what's going to happen here, I'm going to go ahead and in the invoice section, so once I have this information inside the state, I need to go get those from the state. So I got those in state and loaded them into a variable called all invoices, right? There it is. So now the all invoices, I created this variable. I'm going to say all this invoices. I'm going to use a map function. Map function is basically, it's a for loop similar functionality, since React doesn't have like looping concept. Like if you're familiar with looping structures. So map basically does the same thing. So we're going to use anonymous function. So we're going to say for every single invoice, use this anonymous function. And what's going to happen, we're going to say, once you have the invoice, just go ahead and generate this TR as we desire, like this. So we're going to go ahead and say we have TD, right? We're going to build this, we're going to iterate over this loop, and we're going to build all these TRs, basically we're going to generate all these rows from our data. So we're converting our JSON object to table rows, and we're mapping over. So we're basically looping, through the invoice array. So every single item in React, as you might know, it requires a key. So it's basically a unique ID for our row. Now we're going to go ahead and add the React variable. So inside every single invoice, as you know, inside every invoice, we do have ID, which I'm going to add right here. Inside every invoice, the second field that we used in our table was vendor, right? And the third one was invoice.amount. And then we used invoice date, which was basically invoice.invoice date, which I used, invoice number. And we had invoice dot, at the end we have the date, right? So ID for the row, and then we have vendor, amount, invoice, and date. But if you recall, for the action center, I had 4 command buttons, right? And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to create 4 TDs, because I do have a call span 4 for that column. And within every single one, I'm going to create a bottom, right? And this bottom is going to be class name. And as you can know, it's going to be BTN large. And I'm going to go for BTN dash success, right? And I'm going to use on click. I'm going to say, well, as soon as somebody clicks on this guy, we're going to do some action. So I'm not worried about it at this moment. I'm going to add it. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this guy and paste it right here, right here, right here. Maybe I just change this to danger, for example, right? And maybe I just change this to info. Maybe I just change this to warning, right? So and at the end, I have the image, which I'm going to add the image, and I'm going to just add this again as info, right? So this was basically image. The first one was okay. The second one was not okay. The third one, we want to command our accounting department to just pay 50%, and the other guy is just probably 2 question marks that it's asking. Basically, we're asking for more information on this specific invoice. So what we need to do, if you recall, as soon as I clicked on one of these commands, the row disappeared. It means basically we did something. So we require to identify which row, right, which row has been selected, and then we want to do some processing. So the best way to do that, basically we want to get a hold of this ID of this row, so we can pass it and do further processing on it. So the way we're going to do it, I'm just going to go ahead and use anonymous function. I'm going to say this object that I'm working with, it's going to have a remove method that I'm going to provide shortly, and I'm going to pass the invoice ID to it. So for every single item that we click, of course you're free to do more things with this functionality, but for now, in order to keep this simple, I'm going to act that we process something behind the scenes, and then we're just going to go ahead and use a remove function. And remove function is going to help us basically hide that item from the application. That's very simple. Okay, up to here, neat and clean. We are going to go ahead and put some maybe space here so we don't get confused. Cool. And what we need to define right now is basically our remove function. Our remove function is going to receive an ID. So I'm going to go ahead and underneath the state, I'm going to add a remove function right here. So it's going to be remove, and this function, it's going to receive an ID. Perfect. And I'm going to create a variable. So basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to find this ID in my data and filter it and update the state with the new data set, if it makes sense. So let's say, for example, user this should be 200. These are they're like unique ID. So let's say I click on 300. 300 will be passed to this function remove, and then I need to filter and remove this 300. So I need to update the state that I have only two options because I just clicked on 300 and I was able to process it. That's what it means. So let's go ahead to the application. Updated. I'm going to have an updated invoices a variable. This is going to, since the invoice has multiple options, so we're just going to use this by arc, passing by arcs. So we're going to say this.state.invoices. It has a bunch of variables inside it. So we're going to say in this guy, we're just going to filter. I'm going to use I as a variable name, and var i.id, because the ID of the product, it's not equal to ID. So basically that's going to exclude the ID that we just clicked on, right? So I'm going to the state, I'm filtering all the data, right? And I'm looking for the ID that I just clicked on it, and I want to exclude it. So I use not equal. So I'm picking basically all the updates. So now I have the updated information, right? Because I just excluded this ID, I can go ahead and update the state. And the way we do that, always remember, we do set the state, and we're going to say invoices. It's going to equal to updated invoices. Perfect. So we just did the updated invoices. We're going to go down and look what we have here. So one thing I missed here was the closing perfect part of this function call. This is great. So now it's only problem that it's complaining. It says, I don't know anything about invoice in line 56 and that. So, and the reason is this is happening in invoice, and we're going to save this guy, save, and it's just a typo that I used the ones. Okay, so it's just successfully completed. There you go. So we are creating a variable that has all the rows, and it's generating all these basically rows based on the specific unique ID that we provided in our sample data. Again, we'll be receiving these through API, and then we're creating some functionality. So let's go ahead and click on one of them. Nothing is happening. So what needs to happen here, when we click on the item filter should be basically removed, and we want to see the updated variable. updated information in the page. So we're going to go ahead and troubleshoot that. Before we do that, I want to make sure I have all the imports ready, and I want to also add the font awesome thing that I imported. I'm going to fix that delete thing shortly. So I'm going to say I'm going to import a bunch of things from at font awesome, font awesome, right, slash free dash solid, that's svg. This is basically is the component that we install, and it's going to be dash icons, if you recall. And I'm going to create, basically import some of these images, for example, a FA image. And how do I know that? You just simply go here, and once you go there, you can see all the icons. For example, perfect, I can search, for example, for dollar, right? And for dollar sign, let's say what we have here. Let's say, for example, we want to add this icon, and we already saw the name. It was dollar. There it is, search dash dollars. Install font awesome React, and and we're going to go ahead to their GitHub repository. I'm going to close these, and in their GitHub repositories, there's instruction here, and I'm going to go ahead and do it once more. Dash G. Okay, we're going to let it install. I'm going to globally install everything so I don't have to do it every single time. That's why I add dash G. And another one dash G again. Perfect. And then we're going to go to cd app and clear npm start. Font awesome icons. So font awesome icon from at font awesome slash react dash font awesome. Perfect. We just go ahead and install everything. Okay, cool. Perfect. Now we go to app, and then we do npm start. So based on the instruction, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, basically the use, instead of just typing this guy like that. And then I can do fa thumbs up. There you go. And now it's showing up. Fa thumbs down. What else do we need? Let's say we need fa image. I know some of these, so I don't have to look. I want to use like money. Let's say money. There is one actually. It's called money check, I guess. There it is, alternative. And I'm going to use what else do we need? Fa search dollar for our question mark icon. So if we go back, fa thumbs up and thumbs down. So hopefully React is going to refresh. Perfect. So we don't have any error. And the way we use the actual icon is just by adding this nice little, tag to our application. So I'm going to go down, find the command bottom, and then I'm going to just go ahead and add them before those. So for OK, I'm just going to go ahead and use like the thumbs up one. So it's basically, I'm going to use icon fa thumbs up, and I'm going to copy this guy and paste it for the other ones, right? Great. So what's going to happen? This one is going to be FA. This one is going to be FA thumbs down. This one is going to be FA, I don't know, money check alternative. This one is going to be the FA search. Since I imported, I can use these guys as well. So, and then this one is going to be FA images. So hopefully our icons should be there now. There it is. So we just added all the awesome fonts, and our front end we're getting there. I know there's some margin issues, maybe some aligning and panning and things like that, but we were able to get all these data in our data grid. So let's go ahead and fix our final thing, which is basically clicking on these icons, and we're going to pretend to click on OK. Something basically happens to the application and makes an API call, and it handles basically the request or whatever business process we want to handle in the OK section. So what's happening here, I'm going to go ahead and open the developer tool and go to the console, and in the console I'm just going to go ahead and see all the only errors. Okay, so it looks like we have some errors here. In line 82, th cannot appear as a child of th, and that is a correct actually line. We're going to go back, and for our th we're going to add actually scope, and we're going to say these are rows. Okay, th tr, I forgot to add these. Let's see if we can just go ahead and remove this complaint. Okay, it's not complaining anymore. I forgot actually to add the tr to my t head. Okay, so we're going to save this now, and as you can see now I have OK, but the OK function is not actually working, and we're going to find out why in a second. The way we're going to debug this application most of the time in React. So I am passing the invoice variable.id. So I should be receiving that in my basically remove method in my application. And let's find out why that's not working. So first of all, I'm just going to go ahead and have the console.log, and we're going to put this ID inside this guy to see if it's going to report this ID. So I clicked on this guy, on all these guys, so nothing is happening. So basically remove ID, I'm not able to call this remove ID function. So invoice ID is actually empty. That's interesting. There it is. So invoice actually, first of all, it's should be lowercase, because JavaScript is sensitive to case sensitive basically. I save it. Now I should have the invoice number. There it is. So we do have an invoice number in IntelliSense. So I'm going to go ahead and do install React Strap -- save. So I guess I did not install React Strap. So we're just going to go ahead and try again. All right, guys, I installed React Strap. As you can see now, as soon as I type React Strap, it shows up here. And of course, now if I pass invoice.id, I should be able to basically see the ID. Perfect. 100, 200, 300. As you can see, I'm consoling, logging this data. But let's go back. In the remove section, what we're going to do, we're going to make sure the upload happens properly. I think I'm suspicious that I'm doing something wrong here. We're going to find out easily, and yes, I am doing. So my variable, it's called invoices in this state, and I'm updating invoice, which it doesn't exist. So I just need to update the right variable in the state. So there it is. As I'm clicking on the items, we can pretend that something is going on behind the scenes. When I say when I click on OK, It's basically doing some stuff in the background, and we're going to connect this application in the next step to our API gateway and Node.js Lambda function, so we can actually pull this information from DynamoDB. But for now, this is our React application. I'm going to show you how to serve this application from Amazon S3. All right, guys, now our application is ready. We would like to serve this application from our S3 bucket that we're going to build in our S3 section in Amazon Web Services console. So you can go to S3 section, and before we start, I want you to pay attention to one thing. At account level, all the accesses are disabled. So you need to go to this place and basically edit this guy and uncheck this block public access. So you can have control over every single bucket that you build, and you can actually filter them here. Just show me all the public, or show me objects can be public. So you can basically filter everything. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder. I'm going to call it invoice processing-AWS, just the name, right? I'm going to keep the default US West, North California, and then just go forward, and I'm going to uncheck this on this bucket. So remember, first we disabled at the account level. Now we are disabling at bucket level. That's why we are doing it for the second time. So now we're going to go ahead and create this bucket. So basically the idea is we want to upload all the files for our front-end application to this S3, so we can scale, we can become highly available every single time that user requests our website. The website will be ready without maintaining any server. So please pay attention. This part is very important. So we're not maintaining any application whatsoever. This is the beauty of serving static applications from S3. If you become very popular, your website become popular, there's no issues for us scaling and serving the customers in a reliable way. So I want you to then go to Google and search for static website policy S3. I want you to see this on purpose because there's no magic. It's just a simple policy. I'm going to click on this, and I'm just going to copy the default policy, which basically S3 bucket needs for static website. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to select the folder, and I'm just going to go inside. And then first of all, I want to click on properties and go to the static website hosting and use the first one, and then add index.html page here. And this will be basically the address of the website that you will be serving your website from. You can of course map this to Route 53 or a real subdomain or domain later on, and serve the website from your Route 53 basically routing policy that you set in AWS. So if I open the web page now, you will see it says finite, of course, because we don't have anything yet here. So once we save this guy, now you can see the bucket hosting is enabled. So this basically indicates that I can serve a website off of this bucket. I'm going to go back to permissions. There's one thing I want to mention here. There are two ways basically we can put policy, or we can restrict access to any bucket. One of them is ACL, one of them is bucket policy. That's in general, there are two ways, or ACL or bucket or policies, right? So if I go to policy, as you can see, this is off. So basically we're allowing traffic if we decide to allow anything specifically, because we explicitly need to tell AWS that we are allowing all traffic, all requests from outside, from anyone on the web. Principle basically tells AWS allow everyone, right? When you use star. And to get objects, since this is a static website, and our bucket name is called invoice processing -AWS, right? And this is just a simple policy. And as you know, if you're not familiar with policies are just simple JSON basically files they have a statement and version. Version by default is always there. In the statement, you always have an ID, you have effect, principle, and action. And of course, the resource that you're trying to put the effect on, right? So principle, it usually exists, I mean, it's always exists only on resources that you want to apply a policy to. So because since this is an S3 bucket, AWS needs to know who can access this folder. So it makes sense to add a person, to add an identity. But if you are adding this access to a user, you don't have to use this principle because AWS already knows that you are adding this policy to a user, right? So make sure you understand the difference. The principle, we only use it on resources that we want to apply the policy to. Perfect. So before I actually do that, I want to change one more thing, right? This still says get object, and I will for sure add this later on. Okay, so for now, I'm going to change this to everything, and I'll tell you in a second why, because I want to go ahead and upload my file, so I need permission to upload for now. But once it's done, I can basically go ahead and put this back to get object, right? Because I just want to serve this website. I don't want people, to modify my website. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and save this guy. Pay attention to this tag. As soon as I add this public, basically access, since I allowed any principle, any action. So I'm tell everyone, to do whatever they want on this bucket, because I'm about to publish, basically deploy this website and push this website to S3. So remember, we did two things. One of them was property, which we selected the static, and then we added this policy, so we can basically serve our website from this S3 folder. I'm going to go back to my application, and there's a build file that I've already built here. But if you want to recreate your own build file, there's a very, very simple command here. All you got to do, you just go here and you say npm. This time we're going to say run build, and then you hit enter. Once that's done, now we're ready to go ahead and publish this basically folder to build folder to our S3. Okay, once you built that, there's one more piece that we need to take care of, and that is basically in your IAM user. So go to your IAM user and create a user. Make sure you have a user, and this user basically has a few policies applied to. One of them is AWS Lambda, because we're about to use Lambda, S3 full access, DynamoDB full access, and API gateway full access. I'm going to show you all these pieces, why we need to attach these policies and permissions to. So once you do that, then we want to make sure in security credentials, you will basically have a access key and secret access key that, upon creation, AWS will be providing all those information for you, so you guys can basically use it in order to configure your AWS CLI. So make sure your AWS CLI is configured. If it's the first time you're connecting to this account, you can use a command called AWS configure, right? AWS configure, and then AWS configure. Once you hit enter, you'll be able to basically key in access key ID and secret access key, and then you'll be able to issue CLI command, or basically AWS CLI command, to publish your data. So you will be able to basically talk to AWS using command. Okay, so once we did that, now we're ready to close this guy. Make sure you are in the folder. As you can see, I have a build folder here. If I do ls, the build is there. So the command that we're going to use AWS S3 sync build / and we're going to send this guy to invoice processing -AWS. So what I'm doing here, basically sync command, it copies the source information to destination. So I would like to copy whatever I have inside the build, pay specific attention to slash, and then my destination folder is going to be S3 bucket. Since I just configured AWS configure, and basically my command prompt has all the access information that requires in order to contact my AWS account, it's already there. So this command should go ahead and let me update all the information, all the website file to the S3 bucket. So as you can see, now we are getting an error. And the reason that I'm getting error, I do have 2 profiles on my account or maybe more. And so I need to make sure I am using the right profile. The profile that I'm going to use, it's called dash profile dev, since I have multiple profiles on my machine. So I got to tell command prompt, please go ahead and use the keys that's in my dev profile. Hopefully this time works. Perfect. So as you can see, I was able to upload all the files, website files, to the S3 bucket. So now what we're going to do, we're going to go back to S3 bucket. Hopefully this time, if I refresh the bucket information, bucket content, I will be able to see all the website files there. So perfect. So of course I could go just simply, use the upload command, upload, GUI in command and upload my files, but I'd rather use CLI so I can later on automate my deployment process using the CLI. So perfect. And now if I go back, and as you can see, there's a file called index.html, and when we built this website static, we told S3 that there will be an index.html file within this folder, so you can go ahead and use that as an entry point to our application. Perfect. So I think we are ready. I just want to double check that there's no limitation on my folder, on my bucket. And as you can see, it says bucket policy. There is bucket policy, and public access is basically the block section is disabled. So I should be able, hopefully, access this website through the web browser. This is beautiful. So I do have the information, and as you can see, it says the test company, and here are some invoices for our shop, and it's just a simple basic React application. Perfect. So, and the address on top, as you can see, it says invoice processing S3 website, US West 1 AWS.com. So I am serving this website from an S3 bucket. Remember, one thing that I have to change here is basically, instead of having all the permissions for securities into this bucket, I just need to have a get object. So that way I know for a fact people won't be able to modify my website, right? And the only access they're going to have, it's going to be basically just the read access. Go ahead to an API gateway. So API gateway, since we're building a serverless application, API gateway is again same concept. The concept is Amazon is going to take care of all the backend hard work for you to maintain the server, to integrate the security, provide availability, everything for you, and you can only go ahead and expose the APIs that you want for your application. So this is going to be very nice. So when you start, you can actually identify what type of basically API you want to build. Do you want to build WebSocket, which we are not interested? We want to build REST API. And it says, is this you want to import it from Open API or Swagger or example? I want to say just go ahead. This is my invoice API. Perfect. A simple invoice API. Perfect. And this is regional endpoint. I just want to go ahead and use the regional, since the span is going to be throughout the region, which right now is Northern California. I'm going to click on create, and as you can see, I do now have access to my API portal, where we're going to build our API. It's going to be very, very simple. Take a look. So in API development, we call everything resource. So if you go to a web address that says /API gateway or /user/1, that's going to be a resource, right? So what we're going to do, the first thing, as you know, RESTful APIs, they have basically methods on top of HTTP protocol. So we're going to build a method, and as you click on all these options, you will see a bunch of things. If you're not familiar, I do have an API development using Spring Boot where I explain all these concepts, so you can go through that video and learn all these concepts. But for now, let's say we want to use a get method, and as the name indicates, this method basically helps you to get some data and return them to the user. So what we're going to do here, when you select the get method, right, what happens here, AWS is asking you, okay, what type of integration you want to use. For now, I want to use mock. And the reason for that, I want to show you why. So the mock is basically a fake response. I want to go through the architecture first. So the client is going to send a request, and this is how an API works. You usually send a request to an endpoint, and here's the endpoint, right? And it goes to an integration request, right? Integration request. This is basically schema, how we're going to use this information. And in the second part is the integration request, which we are using a mock test. Of course, shortly we're going to connect it to a Lambda function, but let's understand the concept first. So the mock endpoint, so you hit the endpoint on the right side, right? And the system, basically, it's going to send you a fake response back to integration response, right? And HTTP status pattern, output pass-through. We're going to pass this information right there to our method response. And in the method response, even if you click on every single one, you can read about all these different pieces. But basically, this is a flow from client. You go and hit the backend, and you come back to the client. And here's this HTTP code 200, which means the response was successful, the method was successful. That application JSON is basically identifies the type of response we're going to return. So I'm going to go ahead and click on test. And as you can see, if I scroll down and click test, you're going to see there's no data, but there's a response with its status code 200, which indicates this was a successful API call. So let's go back in the get section. What we're going to do, we're going to say when we hit the get method, we're going to actually go ahead and run a Node.js application, right? Okay, now let's say our API is ready. I know it returns a fake response. We're going to build the Node.js part shortly. But for now, let's say you're done with your API and you want to test it. How do we test this? So if you work for a company or you're trying your new ideas on your website, so you're gonna need some sort of separation between the API basically environments. You don't want to deploy your test APIs to a production environment. So what do? You go just to action, deploy API. You want to go ahead and select your development, and if you've done all the tests and it's good to go, then you deploy it to production. For now, I don't have any stage, so I want to build something. I want to say the stage is development, right? And again, development and development. There it is. So I want to build in a stage. I now have a basically development endpoint that comes with a URL. If I open the URL, you can now see that it's returning a empty page. Of course, there's a lot of functionalities in API gateway, which hopefully we'll go through in future videos because there's a lot into it. But for now, I want you to understand that now we have a basically stage that is called dev. Let's say we're going to go ahead and work a little bit on our get method and return maybe something more meaningful here, right? Instead of returning just mock, let's say we want to go ahead and use a Lambda function. And this Lambda function, we're going to use our US West 1 region. And as soon as I create here, it says the Lambda. When I click here, there's nothing here because I haven't built anything yet. So let's go ahead and create a very simple Lambda function that returns a very, very simple response. We connect this Lambda to our get method and deploy it to our endpoint and see if it works. Perfect. In the Lambda section, as you can see, there's nothing here. here is a sample function. It always comes with exports.handler. So basically export says at the output of this Node.js function or Node.js piece of code, which has a handler event and context and callback. So this is always the pattern: event, context, and callback. And the callback is going to return something as simple as hello world. Let's take a look, see if it works. Yes, it does work. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this guy, right, and create a function. And maybe there's a hello world function here, which we can use. Let's see. Oh, hello world. There is a blueprint. In the next section, I'm going to show you how to create your own. But for now, since we're testing just a Lambda function, I'm going to name this hello function. All right. And then it's going to create a new role for me. And in role name, I'm just going to be role name. I'm going to be hello role and return hopefully a hello world response. So let's see how it works. All right, our application is ready. It says hello function. As you can see, hello function is ready. This is just the designer side. Don't worry about it right now. What I'm interested in is my runtime, which is Node.js, and my handler. My handler is basically index.handler. Take a look. Whatever name I use, I'm using handler here. So I have to use exports.handler because Lambda expecting the same name. It's the module name.export that basically will be called when I run this code. So I can simply create new files here, new libraries here. I can do a lot with this IDE, but for now, we're going to keep it very, very simple. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and click on test. And it says create new test event. I say, I don't have anything. I'm just going to use the default, and I'm going to use the name here. I'm going to name it test. Let's click on create. And as soon as you create and you hit run, there it is. It says execution happened. And the response is something as simple as this. So now I'm going to go back to my application. All right. And it's going to be hello function. As you can see now, it's available, and use default timeout. And it says you will not be able to retrieve the previous execution. And I understand that. I'm going to say go ahead and yes. So as you can see, it is saving. Now, if I go ahead and deploy this, remember when you change something, you have to deploy it. I'm going to go ahead and deploy it. Now you will see I do have a response from my endpoint, which is returning null. But I know the Lambda function I just created, it works. Now it's a matter of just going inside this function and basically change it to maybe something more advanced that can read information from DynamoDB. Well, speaking of DynamoDB, we need a data source. You can of course connect to any RDS SQL server, but in this case, since I'm not using heavy joins, since I would rather to use NoSQL database because it's much faster than relational databases, it's a millisecond latency at any scale, at any location. So this DynamoDB tool that you see, it's probably it's one of the strongest NoSQL databases ever built. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and name this invoice table. I'm going to create a table in DynamoDB, which is a NoSQL database. What is my primary key? I'm going to say my primary key is probably an ID, and I'm going to say for now it's a number. So every single DynamoDB comes with two basically primary keys. One of them is called partition key, and the other called is sort key. So you have two keys in DynamoDB. Basically, you can have a sort key like invoice date maybe, and once you do that, you are basically telling DynamoDB to put a second index on this column. But for now, we're going to just go ahead with one primary key, which keeps things a little bit more simpler. And then we're going to create on create. So now the table will be ready shortly. In NoSQL databases like DynamoDB, one thing you need to remember is there's no data schema. When you work with databases like SQL Server, right, or MySQL, you define what type of data you want to put, or what type of structure, what type of schema you have to, or user have to provide for that table. But that's only the case for relational databases. In NoSQL databases, imagine you want to store users' session, like, when they connected, when was the last time they resetted the password, like information like that. You can store those information in DynamoDB real time, and in every single page, you can basically contact DynamoDB to retrieve session information. So one of the greatest use cases of DynamoDB is session management. The second one, let's say you have a voting application that might go live in a TV application, and you might receive millions of requests around the same time. So in order to basically have a fast application, you can use DynamoDB, because there's no need for building heavy SQL joins. So if you don't need heavy joins, for sure you need to go with DynamoDB. If you're building an e-commerce website, right, and you need to store users' cart, let's say I'm ordering 3 things and I want to go ahead to checkout, so you can store that cart as a JSON object, key value item, right, inside DynamoDB table. Perfect. So I want to click on this, and I want to go to item, and as you can see here, I can just simply go ahead and add items here. Create item. I want to say ID, it's equal to 100, and I want to go ahead and append another string. And the second string, let's say I want to name this invoice number. And in fact, I need to look at my application, which I do have it in app.js. If you remember, we had this item, which was basically we have ID, right, which I created it. We have vendor, which is going to be in a string. I'm going to name this just the name of the vendor. I'm going to create an amount. I'm going to say 1800. I'm going to say 1890, so we can tell the difference. And then I'm going to add one more thing, invoice, and then at the end date. So invoice is going to be, this is my invoice number, just a fake invoice number. And then of course at the end I need to build a date, and the date is going to be I don't know, let's say 21st. Perfect. So I'm going to save this item. Take a look. So now I do have one item inside my my database, and I'm going to duplicate this guy. I'm just going to change the invoice number to 2, and I'm going to add maybe a different number, and I'm going to add, I'm a different vendor, so I want to change my coding, right? Let's say this is a vendor code, and I'm going to use a string. The amount is $900, and this is a second, 22nd. These are just the fake invoice numbers, right? These are not real numbers. I just want to have some data here. I want to create the last one, which is going to be, this is my vendor code, right? And these are just vendor code, and the invoice number is 100-290, and the invoice ID is 300. These basically will be generated off of our system, or some sort of, like, you know, identifier, which you know, you can create on your React side or on your basically DynamoDB side. So for now, I'm just going to keep these very, very simple. So as you can see, my next item can have basically one more item or one extra item. If I have another item, my last item can have basically an extra thing called description, which I'm going to type, this is a test, and it's going to be a new vendor, right? And one more thing, my invoice number is this, it's going to be 400, same date, and it's going to be $10,000, right, invoice. I'm going to save this. So take a look. So the only row that has this extra piece of information is row number ID 400, and nobody cares, right? I just added this description. I never anticipated that I'm going to have this field. That's the beauty of NoSQL database. You don't have to predict anything in advance, right? So there are two ways to scan it, DynamoDB. One of them is scan, which basically scans the entire table, which can be very expensive operation if you have a lot of data. And you have a query object, which basically you can apply filters and say number is, let's say, ID equal to 200, right? And then you can just simply go ahead and then search for that item, right? But for now, we're just going to go ahead with scan, and we're going to remove this item, and we're just going to go back to our scan and start search so we can get all the items. So this is a very simple DynamoDB table. I just want to make sure you guys are familiar with this NoSQL database, and I'm going to go ahead and read this information from my application. So before I actually proceed, I just want to double check the table name, and then we can go ahead and click on tables. Here's called invoice table, and as you can see, it says active. Perfect. So my invoice table is ready. I'm just going to go ahead. Let's copy the table name, and I'm going to go back to my Lambda function. So from my Lambda function, now I want to build a Node.js function that connects to DynamoDB and retrieves the information and sends it back to our web browser, or basically API. So our API will call this hello function. This hello function will contact DynamoDB to get the item information and returns the information to our endpoint, which is our API gateway. So eventually, hopefully, when I click on this guy, I should be able to see all the items in my DynamoDB table in the API. So let's go see if we can make this happen. So in Node.js, as I mentioned, since it's a JavaScript, as you can see, there's a console.log. If you're not familiar with Node.js, don't worry. I will be recording a really complete Node.js, like maybe 2-3 hours, one video, awesome Node.js tutorial, so you guys learn everything about Node.js in just few hours. But for now, just follow along and make sure you get the big picture, how this is going to work. By the way, you can change this to any type of application. I can build Java 8 since I love Java. I can build this in Python 3.7 again since I love Python 3.7. But for now, I want to keep it in Node.js, and the reason is I want to show you guys how to integrate different technologies in one application. And again, this is a serverless application. We will be running this file on demand. We will not be maintaining any server whatsoever. If a user comes to our website and issues a command, we will be contacting the API gateway, and API gateway will run our Lambda function. A Lambda function, 1 million requests per month is free, and then you just pay for the runtime and for the request that you're basically telling AWS to run. So if there's no traffic, you're not paying anything. Otherwise, if you run EC2 or any other resources, you are paying for the server no matter what. So this is the beauty and a power of running serverless applications. You can be very cost effective. If cost is an issue for your customer, for your client, this is the approach you want to take. We want to create a constant, right? Why we are creating constant? We usually create constants when we don't want to change the value. And in every single language, if you've ever done Java, C#, Python, any other language, C++, you know when we work with different libraries, we import things in order to make them available in our environment, right? So it makes sense when we work with AWS based services like DynamoDB. We want to access DynamoDB, so it makes sense to import AWS SDK so we can make use of that to contact our DynamoDB. So I want to add something called let's say client. I want to name this constant called client, and I'm going to create a new instance of AWS dot. This is going to be DynamoDB dot, and I'm going to create document client, and I'm going to say the region that I'm in. As you can see, it's Northern California. It's basically it's going to be US West 1. Correct. This makes sense. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is actually to go here inside my application where I want to run. So I have all the constants outside of the function. And this function is basically, it's an asynchronous call, to my DynamoDB database. And the way I want to do that, I want to go ahead and say, okay, inside this guy, I do have a variable. And since we use let or var to basically create variable. I want to say scanning, let's say params, and this is going to be an equal, and I'm going to create a JSON table name. And the table name, as you can see, it's going to be equal to invoice table, right? You remember it was invoice table. Okay, so all I did here is just, told NodeJS that I'm using this table name for my application. I'm going to go ahead to use the client variable that I used, and using this, I'm just going to say, hey, use the scan method in my DynamoDB. If you recall, we had two methods, scan and query, right? I want to have another function, which is a callback function. The callback function, it's for asynchronous call. You basically send the call the function, right? You call the scan and you wait for a callback. When callback comes back, it either has data or error, right? And once you have that available, you can just simply go ahead and make a decision on that. If there is an error, we're going to go ahead and basically call the callback, the main one. So we're going to go ahead and return to user an error, and null. There's nothing I can do, right? So there's nothing else we can do here. The second one, if there is data, so again, go ahead and call the callback. This time, call with null because there's no error, and this time send the data.items back to the user. Perfect. So I just did that on the fly, and I want to go ahead and just make sure that everything looks fine here. Let's see if we can save this and we can test it. Hopefully there's no error. There is an error, and it says callback is not identified. And if you go down, let's go ahead. Well, in handler, I want to go ahead and change this to, function event. If you remember, we had event, context, and the callback. So I want to define the callback right here. Okay, guys, I just fixed this code by just changing the main function, which has event, context, and callback. If you recall, we had the same thing here, right here, and when we started building this function. So when I click on it, perfect. Now I'm getting a different error. Now it says assume role hello role is not authorized to perform DynamoDB scan. So I need to provide a little bit more permission. I'm just going to go ahead and search this guy, and as you can see right here, I do have a Lambda AWS generated, which it doesn't have access to DynamoDB. It makes sense. I'm going to just go ahead and create a full access DynamoDB. I mean, you can of course just give in read or write or whatever access you want to, but in this case, I'm going to go ahead, since I'm not worried, I'm going to remove this application after this tutorial. I'm just going to add a full DynamoDB access. Let's go back to our Lambda function. Now the function should have access to DynamoDB. My Node.js application, now it's contacting the DynamoDB table, and it's pulling data from that. Let's review the function once more. So all I did, I created a constant that's loading AWS SDK. Then I loaded the AWS DynamoDB document client on the region that I want to connect to. And then export.handler is just basically the handler that will be used when we export this function. The function, all it does is just creates a table name and then performs a scan function, scan method on this table. If there's an error, so the response that is coming back from this scan method, it's a function, it's a callback. This callback can be an error, which is an error, we return null. If there's a data, we return data.items. That's so simple. We just created a Node.js Lambda function, and when we test it, as you can see, I am getting response. I am happy with this. Perfect. We are done with our DynamoDB and the Lambda section because we are able to pull data from our database. And we are ready to go ahead and do one more deployment. I just do it to make sure, you know, everything is good to go. And then when it's done, there's a new version available. I'm just going to go back and hit refresh. Hopefully, yes, that's the case. We get response. So our API gateway is now contacting DynamoDB through Node.js and pulling data from it and sending it as a JSON response to our application. Now our application is just ready to make an API call to this endpoint and get all the data information from DynamoDB and connect them, show them on a website. So the beauty again of this architecture is serverless. We are not maintaining any server. If nobody's making any API contact, we're not paying for anything, right? And we have everything, a dashboard, an authorization mechanism, everything here. We can have API keys, we can have VPC links. There's a lot of options in this complete AWS API gateway. This needs probably hours of study and exploration, but I tried my best to show you guys how to create a resource. You can create more methods like put, post, delete, and things like that, and test on your own. But for now, we created the Lambda function that basically calls a Lambda function, and when we call the Lambda function, it immediately goes to DynamoDB and gets all this information. Now imagine you had another application that basically uploads information, all these invoices to that database. You have a live application running on AWS, fully AWS environment. Perfect. Now at the end, we are going to connect this application and make an API call to our endpoint through our React application and pull the data and connect them to the web page. So let's do that. All right, guys, now we're back to our application. Now I want to create a section instead of having those, having the fake data populating our application. I want to go ahead and have some real data, talk to our application. So I'm going to go ahead and comment that section, and I want to add one method in order to make a clean API and finish this application so you can see how easy it is to use serverless application. So first of all, I'm interested always in asynchronous calls. Asynchronous calls, you make the call and you forget. When data is ready, it will come back automatically. User don't have to wait for your application to process the request. They can just leave and do other things, as opposed to synchronous call where a user clicks and you force the user to wait until the application is ready. So I want to go ahead and create an async call, and what I want to do, I want to create a component did mount method. So basically the component connects to the page. This method will be called, which will be basically the initialization page. I want to go ahead and create a constant called response, and I want to go back to my application and grab the address of this resource, right? I'm going to create the dev stage. So let's say you develop this application and you're good to go. You create a second dev. So you create a second stage and you call it production. And again, you go back to resource and deploy it to production. Remember, so you have to have different stages in case you make mistake. You don't want to roll out that product out, right? So response, perfect. It's going to be response. It's going to be equal to, since I'm making asynchronous call, async always goes with await. And it's going to be fetch. I'm going to fetch data from this endpoint, right? I want to have a constant. Now I want to go ahead and have a constant called body. And this is going to be await space response.json. Awesome. And This is going to be a method. What we need to know, we always need to use set state in React, because that's the only way we are allowed to update the state. State is a box internal to a component, right? And basically whatever happens inside the state, the component will be automatically updating the React. So your React component, when we extend a class and we say this is a component, and when we make use of this state, so we are basically inheriting all these features. When something changes inside the state, you need to update the status of the component. So go ahead and update the React done. As you can see, we have an invoices, right? And this invoices that we have inside the state, it was empty. Now it's going to be the response that we just received from the body, and we're going to say that it is loading. It's going to be false because we just received data from endpoint. Perfect. So we are done with this part. Let's just make sure we have everything covered. I just need to close this. Perfect. And we're just going to call npm start. Now we're going to run the application. We just ran the application and it doesn't seem to be working, and looks like there's a problem here, and I can tell you what it is. I didn't fix this on purpose, so you guys understand exactly what I'm doing here. So as you can see, we have an error. It says AWS basically blocked our access because of CORS policy. There are a few ways to fix this. You can go ahead and disable this on your API side. You can go ahead and inject this key in your header. And the last thing, for our testing purposes, there is an extension for your Google Chrome that says allow CORS. I'm just going to go ahead and add this to Chrome. I'm just going to copy this and add this to my header to execution response. And I want to go ahead and enable CORS, right? As you can see, methods enable CORS. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. I'm just going to go ahead and enable it. So as you can see, there's an option. Within this option, in method response, as you can see, I have the allow control now added to my response back. So now I did that. I have to remember, go ahead and apply this to development environment. Our endpoint is still up and running. I'm going to go ahead and refresh the React application. There you go. Perfect. We just got the response back from our endpoint API. Looks like I do have an error here in my HTML just design. We just need to make sure this is perfectly aligned. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So maybe we need to just increase this to 9. I just added a few other things, action, whatever. And as you can see, now our application is running properly. So the point here being is, as you can see, I added all these vendors. I want to go back now to my DynamoDB, and inside DynamoDB, I want to modify one of these values and make sure I'm actually reading this information from my DynamoDB table. And the way it's going to work, I'm just going to go to items, and let's say we change the invoice number 400 from 10,000 to $4,900, right? We're going to save this invoice number 400, which is this guy. It was 1,000. Now I'm expecting to see the new value. As you can see, it's 4,900, and I can say now it's okay, not okay, okay, not okay. Well, in this example, again, let's review what we did. We started by building a React application. Our React application was just a simple one-page application that had a table inside it. We added an API call, which was an asynchronous call to an endpoint that we built inside our API gateway. And the way it worked, inside the API gateway, we built a method called a resource called slash, right? And it has a method, HTTP method attached to it. We went to get, and in our architecture, we basically connected this request to the right side, which is a Lambda function. It calls a Lambda function. A Lambda function, it's just a NodeJS piece of application, piece of code that runs the code and scans the table for all the possible values inside the invoice table. We ran this application. We overcame all the obstacles as far as IAM access roles and test how to test it. And we were able to successfully pull data from DynamoDB table. Once we did that, we went ahead and deployed our API to a development area, and then our endpoint became available as soon as we did that.
Alright guys, we just learned how to build serverless application, meaning maintaining zero server whatsoever, and AWS takes care of basically everything in regards to running your application on demand. So if you don't have demand, you're not paying for anything. This is a great model for your ideas if you want to practice something, or if you want to actually test the market to see if your product works or not. So serverless applications, they're very low cost and great solution for these type of situations. So React, Node.js, AWS, bunch of great things. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel. I hope you liked it, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.